that are most willing to embrace these three trends will emerge from the classic empire the most vibrant, okay? And these three major trends are, number one, deindustrialization and deurbanization, okay? So what I mean by that is that it is silly that we have so many mega cities around the world. Think about how many cities with 10 million plus people there are around the world. And it's silly and stupid because we depend on food to live. And these people in the cities, they're not growing food. And where they're getting food is importing this food from overseas or internally, okay? So you have basically a specialization of agriculture throughout the world, where basically just one nation just does one cash crop, growing bananas or avocados, whatever, okay? But that's just really silly to do. But you can do this as long as you have cheap oil, because cheap oil allows you the fertilizers to grow food, but also cheap oil allows you to transport this food throughout the world. But again, it's all premised on cheap oil. What happens when the cheap oil goes away? Well, you have food supply issues, okay? So these 10 million people in the cities doing whatever, whether it's cryptocurrency scams or gambling on poly market or engaging in derivatives, creating derivatives, creating AI, like it's all just useless and silly. People need to grow food and so that we can eat, okay? So if you are really into AI, guess what? You're gonna be really screwed without access to cheap energy. So stop this AI stupidity and go back to growing food, okay? So that means getting people out of the cities and back to the farmland to grow food, to create more sustainable supply chains. And again, you have to do this or you're gonna starve. I'm telling this entire world, okay? Give up your delusion about AI. It does nothing, it'll get you nowhere. Make sure your people have access to food and water, okay? That's the first major trend.
Es muy de...
Yeah, so I mean, I have a basic point, which is like, industrialization and urbanization require cheap energy. And once you lose access to cheap energy, you have to worry about having sustainable food supply networks. That means you have to move people back to the countryside to grow food in order to feed your population, okay? That has to be done. Okay, that's my first point. My second trend, the second trend that's very important is the idea of remilitarization, meaning that in the future, people are gonna fight over resources. And so you need to remilitarize your population. And what this means ultimately is the return of nationalism. And in some cases, actually the return of fascism, because how you galvanize your population, how you convince them to sacrifice their lives for the greater good is through nationalism. There are some other nations that will become theocracies, the embrace of religious faith, okay? But like the idea of this, like this multicultural, global diversity, DEI, all this nonsense, it has to go away. Just throw it out, okay? No more diversity, no more multiculturalism. Just focus on who we are as a people and the need for us to be cohesive in order to defend our nation. Okay, so remilitarization, the return of nationalism. And the third major trend is the breaking up of the global economy and the creation of mercantile trade networks, okay? And that could be cooperation among certain nations, and that's what we should see in Europe, where Europe becomes its own trading bloc and no longer engages with the rest of the world. But it can also mean that a certain nation becomes dominant in a region and imposes its will in that region. So I see Israel achieving something called the Greater Israel Project and being able to control trade throughout the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Africa. In East Asia, there'll be competition between South Korea, North Korea, Vietnam, Japan, and China for resources. And they need to create their own independent supply chains, especially Japan. Japan is in this sort of scenario the most disadvantaged because they don't have enough resources to fuel their advanced manufacturing economy. And so we could see a very aggressive remilitarized Japan over the next few months. In fact, Prime Minister Takeshi has voiced tremendous support for this Israel-U.S. war against Iran. And she's promised to send missiles and munitions in defense, over to the Middle East to support this war. Okay, so these are the three major trends that we should see over the next few months. Nations adopting more deindustrialized policies, nations embracing nationalism, and then also nations trying to create their own independent supply chains. And the irony, of course, is the nations that benefit the most from globalization will be the ones that actually have the toughest time adapting to the new world. And that includes, of course, United States, China, Germany. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Professor Zhang, about you made a comment about Greater Israel and the attempt to achieve it. Where do you see that now, given that Iran doesn't seem like it's on the verge of collapse? It seems like its government is very much intact, and now even the collective West is admitting this. And I think Europe is on the phone with Iran right now, trying to get a deal to move their cargo and their commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. But also Israel is in heavy fighting with Hezbollah, and part of the Greater Israel Project will also include Iraq, and we